Good afternoon. Good afternoon. As we're letting participants in, let me start off. I do see, according to my watch, it's 12 o'clock, and therefore starting on time so that we also respect those of you that joined us on time. Just to say, as a first, welcome to the first In Conversation With webinar of Fluid Rock for 2025. I'm really looking forward to the theme of this year on building high performance boards and some of the building blocks. It's probably unfortunate that we only have 4 events, quarterly events in throughout an annual cycle, because I think there are so many critical building blocks on this conversation on building high performance boards. And today's topic and focus particularly on one of those building blocks being the relationship between board and management. And from the number of registrations we had for today's webinar, although we know often not everybody joins, but also look out for recordings, it was very obvious that there's a keen interest in today's topic and in this conversation. And I'm extremely privileged to be joined by two, I'm just going to call them leadership gurus, Ian and Wendy, that have extensive experience in corporate corridors, but in particular corporate leadership. And I'm really keen, and I think you're also going to enjoy their view, their approach to the topic that we have, and just sharing honestly their experience, particularly dealing with executives and the views of executives on boards. So those of you in the room with us today that are non-executive directors, some of what is going to be said may or may not be a surprise for you, but it also, may be a bit of a sobering wake-up call for those of us who do sometimes wear the hat of a non-executive director to maybe really reflect and to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, well, to what extent are my behavior, my actions or lack thereof contributing to some of the challenges that Ian and Wendy is going to highlight for us, and that we will have a bit of a conversation on. So with that having been said, and participants still joining us, as I've mentioned, really the focus today on the relationship between board and management. Now, if you go and do Google, if you go and do a bit of research on the topic of relationship between board and management, words like essential, like fundamental, like crucial, those words come up in trying to kind of stress the importance of a constructive, positive, good relationship between board and management to really ensure the long-term sustainable success of organizations. So it kind of seems as though everyone talking or writing on this topic are basically aligned and on the same page. Yes, it's critical. It is critical that we have the right kind of relationship between board and management. From a management perspective, also understanding that, together with the board, we form the leadership of the organization and what needs to be done to build that relationship. So we agree it's essential, it's critical. But, and this is where my personal interest comes in this topic, in the many, many, many board evaluations that we have done, as the Fluid Rock team over the many years, and also, in my own experience of growing up in the corporate trenches of South Africa over the past 34 odd years, having witnessed the relationship and being left with the impression that most of the times it was not a healthy relationship. It was not a constructive relationship. It was not helping. To the contrary. One of my colleagues at Advisory Cairo last year wrote an article about some of the takeaways that we have, had the privilege of reflecting on as part of the outcomes of these board evaluations, and what do we believe are one of the, some of the critical building blocks and no surprise, the relationship between board and management came out as a key priority. So what are we seeing? We see often tension. We see challenges, and different kinds of tension, different kinds of challenges. We see a misalignment on strategy, for example. Um, Personally, having experienced the frustration of a CEO and his team with a board when it's kind of to them obvious that the board is not getting it, so to speak, when we talk about strategy. They get it. So why can't the board not get it? For them, it's just so obvious, and yet they get challenged and they get pushed back, sent back to the drawing board. What should be the priorities for the business? There's challenges in communication. I've sat in how many board meetings where either management gets reprimanded for providing too much information and board members complaining that they've been drowned in information and being concerned about the devil in the detail and what's potentially hidden, not helping to build a relationship of trust. Or the other side of the coin, I've been in board meetings where board members have said, are we really receiving the mushroom treatment here from management with these kind of thin board papers we're getting? Where's the real heart of the information? And we feel that we're getting a bit of what's that kind of mushroom treatment where you kept in the dark and, excuse my French, fed on manure. Again, not helping to build that trust and to build the relationship. You have the priorities, the demands, the expectations on from both sides that are often different. Again, my experience, again, I want to use the word often at the risk of sounding overdramatic, but there's trust deficiencies. We don't necessarily believe as board and management that we are on the same team, that we all actually want the same thing. And I think a question that management is often left with is, does this board actually even care about the future of the business as much as we do as the management? We don't see that. We don't feel or experience that. There's role confusion, this kind of CEO saying to me, when you talk to my board, please just get them off my back because they're in the engine room. They are micromanaging. As our CEO, Ronald Klein, always says, swim in your lane. They're not swimming in their lane. And there's confusion either intentionally or as a result of just not understanding the role. There is the confusion and overstepping, so to speak, of boundaries. So I can actually take up the whole hour, I think, just talking about these real life experiences that I have witnessed in my 30 years that has left me fairly cynical on this topic about relationship, and me asking, well, if we agree that it is a critical element, it is a critical building block for a high performing board. And let me just interrupt myself and say this research and studies will also tell you that the performance of the board has a direct impact on the performance of the business. In other words, we cannot tolerate, the business cannot afford a mediocre board. I think we can agree with that as well. We need high performance boards. And if that is correct, if we all agree with that, then we also need to agree that we need to have the best constructive, productive relationship between board and management. But we have challenges. We have real life elephants in the room, so to speak. And I'm not now referring to my learned panel here, the elephants, Ian and Wendy. But I would love, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation, to hear a little bit about what you have learned in the years that you've done work with various levels of leadership in organizations, and also what you believe to be potentially some of the quick fixes, some of the longer term solutions in order to turn this around, if at all possible. I don't want to preempt what you're going to tell us. So, Ian, I'm not going to go in the interest of time into your pedigrees, your CVs. You're welcome to share a bit of that yourself with our audience. But if I can jump right in and ask you, and then Wendy as well, just again share, just start off by sharing with us some of your experience in this field. And thank you once again for taking time to join us this afternoon. It's highly appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Annamarie. It was around August 2007 that I received a call. And it was a call from our founder and our CEO at the time, and it was offering me a professional opportunity that I'd really wanted, and I had no hesitation in accepting. And what this opportunity was to move to the UK, move my whole life to the UK from South Africa at the time, and consolidate a number of projects that we had going on in the business through the UK and Europe into an entity, an organization in the UK, and my role would be managing director of that business. And it was very exciting in 2007. It was somewhat less exciting in 2008 when I got on a plane a week after the financial crisis had started, and I was going over to start a business in England. It was pretty terrifying. But whilst it felt the world was against me, I did have one thing that was just incredibly fortunate, I think, in hindsight. When I arrived in the UK and went into the office on day one, we had a board member of our business in South Africa who was based in the UK, and he had negotiated with us some office space in a building, and so he was, if you like, a little bit invested in this, and I had a good relationship with him. But I hadn't expected what would happen on that Monday morning. I arrived in the office. Every single one of the projects that we were doing was put on hold. In other words, the first month that I was in this new role, we had no revenue. I walked into our board member's office, somewhat panicked by this experience. And he said to me, "Look, welcome to England. I hear that I appreciate that you have problems. What you need to do," he said to me, "is walk down the passageway, and 3 doors down, there is our financial director. Why don't you go and ask him if he will extend a line of credit to you so that you can pay salaries this month?" I'd never met this man in my life. I walked into his office, and it was very clear that in the time that I'd walked down this passage, a phone call had been made. Because when I made this request, it was very much, "Hello, how are you doing? Can I please have £100,000 or whatever?" And when I made this request, it wasn't as if there was no accountability that came with it. I mean, what he said to me was, "I will do this, but appreciate I will do this once. And there are terms attached to this." But it was a lifeline which enabled our organization to succeed. Later that morning, I was sitting at my desk, still trying to gather my thoughts, when the same board member walked in with the top salesperson from their organization. And he said, "Ian, this is Nick. Nick, this is Ian. Nick, please will you take Ian around on sales calls with you? He's trying to build a business. He needs a network. He comes from South Africa." And so I spent a number of weeks basically in this guy's shadow, wandering around London, building a network while he introduced me to people. And the third thing he did for me was he said, "Let us have a monthly catch-up, just 30 minutes, in case you need any advice, in case you have any thoughts, anything you'd like to bounce off me." Now, I mentioned I arrived in this organization and there were no projects, there was zero revenue. In that first year, which was 2008, 2009, we did in fact break even. So we didn't lose money. We didn't retrench anyone. We didn't get rid of anybody in a time when 2 million people were made redundant in London. The following year, we exceeded our targets by, I think it was double. And all of that happened because somebody extended a lifeline to me, a level of trust that I don't believe I deserved at the time. But it made the world of difference. And that is not, when I share this experience with people, that is not the experience most people have of board members, I'm afraid to say, right? A lot of the time, what people experience from board members is quite the opposite, is the kind of, you should be able to make this work. These are your numbers. This is what you have to do. It's on you. We pay you a lot of money. You need to get it to work. And I think that is the dynamic which is quite tricky, and that's the dynamic which we are hoping to change. We work primarily with senior management teams. We do a little bit of work with boards as well, but frequently people are talking about their relationship with the boards, and anecdotally, complaints fall into three large categories. The first category is too much reporting. If I had a penny for every time I heard a senior manager say, there's just too much reporting, can I not get on with my job? The second one is interesting. Managers frequently tell me that they feel underappreciated. Now, these are not managers who are failing, right? These are managers who are succeeding. They never tell me they feel underappreciated from the perspective of remuneration. They feel underappreciated on a personal level. I don't know if that makes sense. They feel like this is a transaction. So I do the work, you pay me the money, but I want this to be deeper than that. And I'm not feeling that level of appreciation. And the third list of complaints goes into something, Annamarie, which you touched on, which is the board is making these decisions, but half the people in the room don't actually know what's going on in the business. And if they do know what's going on, it's only because of what's in the board pack, which is frankly what I chose to tell them. So it's stuff that I already knew. And it is an interesting dynamic because it relates very closely to work that we do in our organization and where our organization comes from. So I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about legitimate leadership and the work we do, and I'd like to share some slides. In the 1980s, late 1980s, the Labour Research Organization in the Chamber of Mines did some...
Yeah, sorry, I can't see the slide, so I don't know if others can. Anna, you're shaking your head. Try again.
Right, there we go.
Coming up, yeah.
Right, okay. So in the late 1980s, a study was done by the Labour Research Organization in the Chamber of Mines, and that study included 70,000 employees in the industry, and it was into trust in management. And basically, people were asked the question, do you trust management? And people could either strongly agree, 10 out of 10, all the way down to strongly disagree. And what was expected at the time was that there would be, this is a absolutely fractured environment during apartheid, and there was an expectation that there would be broad levels of distrust across the entire industry. But that is not actually what came out of that study. What you're seeing on the screen now is some of the results that came out, and it was a broad variation in trust. And so the research team went out to look for factors that might influence this trust. Of course, the union said the issue is pay. If you pay people so little, how can they be trusted? Management said the problem is the unions. Academics said the problem is levels of education. I mean, there were various factors which were put forward, and in this research, literally none of those factors proved to be significantly correlated. What came out of a second round of research was something slightly different, and it was around leadership style. Do you believe your manager has improved or is getting better? always a good manager versus do you believe your manager is bad or is getting worse? And why do you say this? And what came out of that exercise was this nugget that we've been applying in organizations for the last 40 years. And this is it. Managers, both individually and hence collectively, are accepted or rejected on the strength of their perceived interest in the well-being of their people. Trust is granted or withheld. Leadership is seen to be worthy of support or not, primarily on this basis. In other words, it's the relationship that matters more than anything else, more than all of these factors that we try to adjust. Very importantly, though, what this does require is what we call an inversion in the line of service, or an inversion in the line of command. Imagine this is a modern organization. You have various layers in the organization. If we ask the average manager, what is your job? The answer we get is, my job is, wait for it, to provide results to the CEO. If we ask the average sales supervisor, what is your job? It is to hit my targets, give results up the line. If we ask the average employee, what is your job? It's the same thing, to give results up the line. What happens when we ask the average CEO what your job is? Well, also to give results up the line. And in fact, the entire organization is looking up the hierarchy as a primary issue. What we're asking for is two things. Firstly, there's somebody missing from this picture, and that person who's missing sits between the employee and the result, and it's the customer. In other words, the employees don't deliver your results. Your customers put money in the bank, and it is your customers who require great service. So if you are going to get your customers to put money into the bank, you need to be delivering a great service to them. But as the employee, how can you be facing up the line and facing the customer at the same time? Answer, we need the support within the organization to also turn around. And what this research showed is that, in fact, what we need is for managers to turn around and give their people two essences. The one essence is care, a genuine concern for the human being behind the human resource, and the other is growth, the ability to realize one's potential over time. And this care and growth give needs to happen throughout the line. If we now include the governing body into this, you can see that it wouldn't make sense for the CEO to be looking up the line. The governing body, in our view, is there to give something to the organization, not the other way around. The big question, of course, then is, well, what is that give? And I'll explore that in a second. But first, I need to say this. We're not for a second arguing that results are not important. Everybody needs to keep an eye on the results. But what you'll notice in this picture versus the last one is, in this picture, the arrows are pointing towards the results. In other words, we're concerned with what we can give to the result as opposed to what we're getting from the result. Because it's in what we give to the organization, to our people, that we actually end up improving the results. What does this inversion in the line of service actually mean for boards? Well, it means a couple of things. Firstly, it means caring for and growing the executive, having a genuine concern for the human beings in the executive team. Frequently, people who I've spoken to have felt, and this may be a completely false impression, but have felt that they are expendable, that if they don't hit the results, the board will get rid of them very quickly without any concern for the human behind the human being in the room. It means that we need to worry about not only what we're getting, measures like profit, measures like safety, performance over the period, your financial positions. Those things are important, but we also need to worry about what we're giving. What are the lead measures? Are we seeing quality improvements? Are we seeing positive safety performance in the organization? Are we seeing incremental improvements in production processes? Are we seeing innovations? What is our key customer feedback look like? What are the lead measures? What are the employee enablement metrics that we can look at and that we can impact? Do employees understand and support the vision of the organization? Questions like that. We know that people are motivated when they understand the purpose of the organization. And it's fascinating to me how many people, when I ask the question, what is your organization all about? What is your purpose? The number of senior managers who struggle to answer that question in a coherent way is to me quite fascinating. So in summary, I suppose what I'm saying is that we need to make 3 shifts in our view. The first is a shift in our why. And I'm talking about this from the perspective of shifts that the board can make. I'm not for a second suggesting that management is perfect and that there's no shift. It's just that that's the topic for today. A shift in our why, in other words, a shift in what we care about. Now, Annamarie, you also mentioned this as you started, but the number of times I've heard people say the only thing they care about is results. Now, I personally believe there's a bit of projection there, because when I start saying, is that actually true? People often kind of they wind back on it and they say, well, it's not true, but it's what's primary. It's what seems to be true. And I think we need to have a broader set of things that we care about, right? We need to care about standards. You don't improve results by raising targets. You improve results by raising standards. But we talk about targets all the time. We don't talk about standards nearly enough. When I've sat reporting into boards in previous roles that I've had, people have never asked me in a board meeting, what standards have you shifted in the organization? But they frequently ask me, what about this division? Why didn't it get to the numbers that we had set, etc. The second shift is a shift in what we give and in how we give it. In other words, the what that this board member gave me in the UK, it was fundamental. It didn't take loads and loads of time, but it was a level of trust which inspired me to really commit to the organization. It was an introduction to a key individual who helped me to find new clients. And if that story that I told you at the start of my talk was really saying what happened on that first day changed the course of that organization. And the entire story that I told you probably took 45 minutes out of this individual's life, but it made all the difference to me. And the second thing about how we give it is, I do believe that we need to spend more time really understanding, looking under the covers, doing things like building relationships, coaching, etc. We've done some work where we got an entire board together and asked the question, what do you believe is your give to the organization? And it started with, well, I need to attend 2 meetings a year. And it ended with everyone making a commitment to choose a senior executive to coach and to mentor. And it included a couple of people saying, I've got industry connections where I can make introductions to this. But that wasn't the starting point, if that makes sense. It seemed obvious by the end of the day, but at the start of the day, the commitment seemed to be, I need to read the board pack and go to the board meeting and ask the most difficult question that I can come up with. Okay. The third is a shift in what we hold the executive accountable for. And here, we're not suggesting for a second that you stop holding people accountable for the organization's performance. Of course, people must be accountable for that. But don't think of the organization's performance narrowly as what you did in the last period. The organization's performance includes future performance. It includes alignment with purpose, mission, vision, etc. And there needs to be accountability for what have we done this period, which is going to enable us to succeed 5 periods from now or 6 periods from now. What standards have we changed? What innovations are we looking at? What are we implementing? Who are we hiring? How are we engaging our people? In addition to not in place of, but in addition to worrying about what is our current performance, because obviously that needs to be a key metric. And I do think that none of these things are easy, and I think that there is a lot of nuance in what I'm talking about and how it applies in different industries and in different organizations of different sizes, etc. But I do think that if we apply our minds to what can we give, how can we become really, really impactful for the executive in the organization? And one way to do that is to simply ask them. One way to do that is to simply say to somebody in the executive, is there anything I can do for you? Is there anything I can help you with? Are my thoughts. Wendy.
Right. Thank you very much, Ian. Ian's going to drive the slides. Thank you. And I really want to build on what Ian has said so far, because obviously we're fairly aligned in our thinking on this. Put a little bit more flesh on the bones, if you like. And then I would like to end with an example that still stays with me in terms of a relationship between a board and an executive team in an insurance company in South Africa. So it was Bill Clinton who famously said, it's all about the economy, stupid. Okay. We think it's more appropriate in the context of boards and executive teams to say, no, it's about the relationship. That, more than anything else, is what matters. And when the relationship, as you said, Annamarie, in your introduction, is constructive and collaborative, it's a fundamental different experience from the opposite. So Ian has alluded to this. If you click in any relationship, then the key issue is trust. And Ian really shared this seminal research into trust in the South African gold mines and really suggested that in management-employee relationships, trust is key. But our experience is that trust applies in any relationship. Okay, it's equally important within a team, between teams, and between customers and suppliers, and ultimately also, obviously, because that's what we're talking about today, the key issue, I believe, between boards or governing bodies and the actual organizational executive teams is this trust. And I want to make a distinction here between something called authority and something that we would refer to as legitimate power. In other words, authority is vested in the position you hold. If you are the chairperson of the board, if you are the CEO of the company, that authority you have on day one. It's given to you. But in our view, you really only have legitimate power. In other words, your authority is only really accepted, and hence people trust you, are willing and loyal to you, when you earn that legitimate power. And as Ian said, you earn that legitimate power primarily through giving, not money, but giving these two things called care and growth. So trust is granted. Next clip, please. Simply, this goes back to the initial research, on the perception by each party, and that's important, of the degree to which the other party has their best interests at heart. So if you like, it's interesting, it's the executive team that actually decides whether to trust the board or not. And it's the board that decides whether to trust the executive team or not. Okay, you can't tell someone you must trust me, they decide. And when we talk about the degree to which you're prepared to have their best interests at heart, it's literally, in another way of putting this, is the degree to which you're prepared to suspend your agenda, or if you like, your needs for theirs. The essence of it is who comes first, whose needs are met. So the issue is intent or motive. And if you just click again, in very plain English, it's the question of, are you in the relationship to give or to take? Now, clearly, those are two absolute extreme positions, and nobody and no entity, I think, is 100% here to give or 100% here to take. I mean, we all have self-interest. We all have mixed motive, in fact. But here's the critical thing that we've learned, okay? The degree to which you are prepared to give is a function of your maturity. As people individually and collectively mature, they develop this increasing capacity to give unconditionally. So the next slide really deals with, so what does a mature board versus an immature board look like? Okay. And if we go to this fundamental distinction between being here to take and being here to give, and by the way, and this is a critical point from our point of view, there is nothing in terms of give and take that is a matter of skill or competence. Essentially, this is a choice that the party makes. You choose whether you're going to tell the executive team what to do, and yet don't actually set the example yourself. Okay. So that's typically, if people just read through, some indicators that the governing body is here to take. And we have spoken, Ian has spoken about this endless reporting. And I was with two executive teams, actually. The one team said, and they said this was not an exaggeration, they were spending 70% of their time preparing reports for the board. And answering queries from the board. A second company that I worked with, and I smiled at this, they actually employed someone full-time in the organization, and they said to this person, your job is to feed the beast. In other words, your job is to provide this information that they keep requiring so that we can get on with running the business. Okay, so let's look at what is a governing body, conversely, who's here to give. And it's a fundamentally different perspective. Okay. When I say that they respect the executive team, see them as equals, what I really mean by that is they absolutely respect the fact that both parties have a unique contribution to make. And almost, if you like, being respectful means that you allow both parties to take accountability for and make the contribution that is required of them. Okay, and when you say they are here for the long term, I think this is also exactly true. I mean, someone said once, the only purpose of any business is to stay in business. So it is about saying we are building a business here or an organization here that is sustainable into the future. And we're not going to do that if we simply knee-jerk reaction on short quarterly results. Okay, but there are two parties in this relationship. Okay. And therefore, equally, you have executive teams who are here to take and those who are here to give. And I'm reminded of my own personal experience over many years in the relationship between management, of which I was a member, and the unions that we dealt with at the time. And just to say, it was a fundamentally different experience dealing with a union that was mature as opposed to a union that was not. So if you are immature, or in words here to take, as an executive team, that's the sort of thing that you will be concerned with. And the absolute opposite of what Ian suggested, they're not there to care and grow the people below them. They're only here and concerned with getting results out of them. Conversely, executive teams who are here to give do the following. So, Annamarie, again, I think you spoke about it's not about giving the board too thin information. It is about keeping them informed, but within reason. And therefore, the detail of information you feed is obviously very important. Right, and we're open and we're transparent. We don't try and hide the actual realities of the business and where we're at, what are the challenges we're facing, what are the difficulties and obstacles that we need to overcome to succeed on an ongoing basis as an organization. So the example I wanted to end up with, and it is a true example, it's an example of an insurance business in South Africa, still existing today, who were initially owned by a European business. I won't give the country because that will give the game away, but suffice to say they pulled out of South Africa and they got new owners, and these owners were an international insurance company, and they were housed, the head office was in Toronto, Canada. And after a few months of actually taking over this business, the person sitting in Toronto requested the CEO to come to Toronto and said to him, I need you to come here. Sorry, I know it's a long way, because I need to say something to you and I need to say it to you face to face. So you can imagine this was not a comfortable flight over. And the CEO obviously assumed he was going there and this guy was going to fire him. Anyway, after a few niceties, this person in Toronto said, you know, Edwin, I tell you why I've asked you to come here. It's because you're driving me nuts. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you keep on sending me these reports. I'm not interested. Worse still, you keep on asking me for permission. I don't have to give you permission. We bought your business. Why? Because we have absolute faith in you and the caliber of your management team. Not only that, we know that you understand the South African market better than we could ever possibly do. So will you please stop pestering me and irritating me and go back and run this business? And I asked Edwin, when you climbed on the plane, ordered a gin and tonic because you realized you still had a job, what was your primary feeling? And he said, I felt liberated. And he said he went back to South Africa, and this was the critical thing. Now that he had this authority, he was now in a position to devolve that decision-making authority to his executive team and for them to do likewise down through the organizational hierarchy. And they did this over a number of years, but to the point where the people in the front line, the actual agents, are totally and utterly independent in terms of making their decisions. And surprise, surprise, the organization is performing very well. So in conclusion, I guess we're saying the issue is you can only look after your side of the transaction. You don't determine the other party's intent. But get your intent right and let the other party take care of theirs.
That's very profound, Wendy. That's really, I think, kind of summarizing it very well. The message that both you and Ian have given so eloquently as well. And so much of what you spoke about, we can continue for hours. I was thinking as Ian was talking as well about, the caring. Just yesterday, I think listening to an Audible book about habits, interestingly enough, and he was quoting an organization where a new CEO was appointed. The organization listed entity in the US. They were in heavy duty manufacturing, and the investors were quite concerned about the new CEO who came from government. apparently a government official, and they were just, this is the worst decision the board could have made. And so they all packed the room when there was the first opportunity where this new CEO was going to talk to the investors. And he stood up, looking, very smart, confident, stood up, and he said to the investors in the room, I'm going to talk to you today about the safety record of this company. Because for too long, this company have caused harm and injuries and even death to our employees. And that on my watch is going to stop. I want to talk to you about, and they were like, where's the numbers? What are you aiming, what's your target? To Ian's point, what are we going to make profit? What are you going to declare as a dividend? What's the stock? This man is a lunatic. In fact, he went even further. He said, and I want to tell you in the room, just to show you the exits to this room. If you look behind you, those would be the exits in the case of an emergency. And they thought this man is crazy. They ran out of there. They phoned, they contact sell, just sell this. They've got a lunatic in the CEO. He just spoke to us about safety and how he's going to improve the safety record. And he then tells us the story about how well that business did, how everybody that sold regretted, and how they would have doubled their investment had they remained invested in the business. And I think it talks to the point that Ian said as well. It's about that. Do we genuinely care? That was the message that came through from the leadership to the organization. Me as the CEO care about you. In an Audible book, I also was listening to a new CEO taking on the role, and he had prepared slides, bringing his leadership team into the room, and he was going to present to them what the targets. Here's what we have to achieve, etc. And then during the night, struggling because this business was struggling, and him really having an internal struggle about how is he going to change this around. He actually deleted all his slides, and he had one slide, and the slide said, "How can I help you?" As the CEO. And they said that
I was in the room when he did this.
Was it you who told maybe I remember hearing the story somewhere, and it was a game changer for that organization. And the same thing if we equate that with the board. But there was a comment on the Q&A about maturity, and you and Ian both referred to that as well, the intent. The maturity, are we givers, are we takers? What is our real objective for being there? And the same person, Rob, also said, well, surely both the board and executives are there to act in the best interest of the company. Unfortunately, the scoreboard tells us otherwise. We have all these corporate failures. We have lots of executives currently in this country even facing criminal charges, civil claims for what they have done, and that's not only executives, non-executives as well. So our scoreboard doesn't look good, and that's part of where the trust deficit comes in as well. So what do we do? How do we, in both Ian and you and Wendy, what's the kind of low-hanging fruit? Where does a board who says, you know what, I've heard this, I've listened to you, I get what you're saying, I really think we need to do something here. What do they do? Where do we start with this? Because it's not going to change overnight. We realize that it's a process. Where do we start in this process of building the constructive relationship that we so desperately need to achieve the long-term success of our business?
Can I put it this way, Annamarie? The change begins with you. And by that, I mean that it's up to each and every individual on the board, as well as every individual in the executive team, to make this intent shift. Okay. So if I can just quickly tell you my own personal story, I was employed at African Explosives Limited, the biggest commercial explosives factory in the world at the time. And we were bought by Imperial Chemical Industry. And within 6 months, we had 2 explosions and killed 14 people. And our new owners came out and said, listen, we in ICI don't kill people. So even if you've got 87% of the market and you're 130 years old, fix this or we close you down. And this was the fundamental insight we had. I mean, if you've got a safety problem, which we definitely had, you've got a people problem. Because 85% of accidents are caused by people doing what they shouldn't or not doing what they should. Penny dropped. But if we've got a people problem, we've got a leadership problem. Wheel the problem. The project is us. And for 3 years, we worked on ourselves and we embraced actually this framework. We called it our golden thread and we changed the way we led. And the good news was 3 years later, we were acknowledged to be the safest commercial explosives factory in the world. So I guess my answer is you have to begin with you.
Yeah, starts with the leadership. Ian, any observations from your side on this conversation?
Yes, I think two things that are for me really important. The one is you don't earn legitimacy without time. You cannot build a relationship without time. People need to spend some time getting to know one another in order to build a relationship which can survive a robust conversation. And I'm not sure that that time is always invested in getting to know one another as opposed to being invested in the outcome. And thus the trust, there tends to be a trust deficit when things get difficult. The second thing is, if you are going to orient yourself to give, you need to give some headspace to what am I going to give. So in preparation, for instance, for a meeting, you could spend the entire time going through the board pack, as an example, and looking for questions that you can ask and how you can do this. But there's a fundamental question: what am I going to contribute during this discussion? Or what am I going to contribute outside of this discussion? You know, if I'm on the governing body, my responsibility doesn't end when I leave the room. So what is my give? And that for me has been a bit of a game changer question to ask people in governing bodies around what is your give? If you had to really think hard about what contribution you could make to this organization beyond the meeting that you attend, that has enabled some very interesting insights to come out and very helpful for the executive. And if you're helpful, then the relationship builds. And if the
That's how you
relationship
build
builds,
trust.
yeah. And if the relationship builds, then you can start having robust conversations. And when you start having robust conversations without that impacting trust, then you can start to shift the standards in the organization.
And it's to the point that that trust that we were talking about. I think it's Ronald Reagan who's said to have said, although apparently he kind of borrowed the saying from what I think is quite ironic, a Russian proverb that says, trust but verify. So my role as a non-executive is to ask questions. And this is a dynamic that I've seen in boards as well, where the minute non-executive directors start asking questions, it's often very quickly received by executives as a vote of no confidence, while it is actually their job. It's their job to ask questions, but I also want to say the how they do it is important. And, when you as a non-executive director, also when you wear different hats, I always say to nominee non-executive directors, you have to work that much harder to build a relationship of trust with the executives, because they're not 100% sure what's driving your questioning. Is it a shareholder agenda that's driving it, or is it a sincere, concern for the business and for helping me to grow this business? Or is it because you're representing somebody that's just concerned about the next dividend, check in the mail, so to speak, that's driving the challenges that we're getting on strategy, etc.?
One of the things, Annamarie, which I think is interesting in the work we do is um, people will claim to have a positive intent, a positive motive, um, but will blame the fact that they're not experienced in that way on time. I just don't have time. I mean, if you just can't believe how many people don't have time. And the I suppose the tough give to people who say that to you is, or to me, is if you don't have time, do you really have positive intent?
Mm.
Mm.
You can't claim to care about your family if you never spend time with your family.
True.
It's easy to say I have positive intent. It's what you do with your time that really matters.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would like to just build on that, though, a bit, because, if we talk about legitimate power and it comes from care and growth, another way of looking at that is tough love. So I don't think this is about boards being sweet necessarily
Soft.
or
Mm.
soft, not at all. I mean, in fact, if you genuinely care about someone, you are going to accept absolutely nothing less than the best that they can be. So if you want to cultivate an executive team that is strong, then yes, there's got to be some accountability there as well. But again,
Absolutely.
if the executive realizes you're doing this tough thing in order to enable them and help them, then your toughness as a board member will be absolutely accepted.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you respect it.
Yeah.
Ian and Wendy, there's so much we can talk about still. I would so love to just continue this conversation. However, we are always quite strict in ending on time and respecting people's time, and maybe we must reconvene later, God willing, somewhere during the course of the year, and continue this conversation. Ian, your point about raising standards to me was something, that really, I think, in itself warrants a topic, a conversation as well. And my recommendation to those on the call today as well will be just to really look in the mirror, to do that introspection, and also to kind of have these difficult conversations with management and come together to say, well, to what extent are we not aligned? What are your concerns with us as a board? Let us tell you what our concerns are with you as executives. Let's have these honest, open, constructive discussions that are sometimes painful conversations, and let us agree. How do we move forward as a team? What are the non-negotiables? What are our undertakings to one another in this relationship? There was an article that appeared in a Harvard business publication many years ago, 24 years ago. The heading was, "What makes great boards great?" The subheading was, "It's not about rules and regulations. It's about the way people work together." And I cannot, after 34 years in boardrooms, support that and agree with that enough. That is what I see. It's really about how we show up. It's about our maturity. It's about our intent that Ian and Wendy has explained so well. Are you a taker, or are you a giver? And with that, Ian, both you and Wendy today were absolute givers. We so appreciate it. I love the work that you do at Legitimate Leadership. May you go from strength to strength, and let's one day get back in the room to continue our conversation. For those of you online who joined us today, we hope it's been of value. I see some really good positive comments coming through. Thank you for that. Thanks for joining us. And please keep your eye open for our next event in the next quarter of 2025. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Wendy. Thanks, Ian.
And thank you, Annamarie, in the first instance for setting this up, and secondly for the large number of people that have dialed in. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Fluid Rock team, as always. Have a good Friday and enjoy the rest of the weekend as well. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.